Slash her? I barely even know her. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor and I'll be your host as we go through all the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below and it'll give you a pretty good idea of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is all about. In short, we look at a particular subgenre of horror and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. But this is our doctorate level selection series. This is where we talk about a video of a subgenre we've already covered. And we kind of do a quick recap of it and catch you up on what we talked about previously. And then we pick a 4th doctorate level selection. Something that's usually either a little more deeper cut, or maybe something that's a little bit more new and has made a lot of buzz, or just something that's a little bit off the beaten path, maybe something new and different to talk about, to revisit the subgenre. And that's a particularly noteworthy thing here, because this time we're revisiting the slasher subgenre, which is, as many of you who watch the channel know, one of my favorites, probably my absolute favorite of the subgenre. So something I've been looking forward to getting back to for quite some time now. I was just waiting for the right movie to talk about, and I think we've got it, but more on that in a second. If you missed the previous slasher subgenre video, link to that in the description below. But in short, we covered a lot about what the slasher subgenre is and how it's my favorite, and just a little bit of the history of where it started and what it became, how it became very popular in the 80s, and a lot of the tropes about it, including like how people feel like it's both misogynistic and feminist at the same time. And we talked a little bit about that. Not a deep dive, just kind of an overview, but still worth checking out if you haven't seen it already. We then examined 3 movies that are indicative of the slasher genre, good examples of it that aren't the slasher icons, because we separated those out into a different video, the slasher icons, the Freddys, the Jasons, the Michael Myers, and we put those, gave them their own video so we could talk about more slashers, basically ones that were maybe a little less big, weren't quite so franchised, things like that. And these are the movies that we talked about. We're going to go ahead and recap them for you right now. The first slasher movie that we talked about in the video was The Burning. And The Burning does have a classic sensibility. It is a kind of a cult classic, or maybe even just like a real bona fide horror classic, but it's definitely not on the same level as things like Friday the 13th and Halloween. It's not as popular as those, in large part because it wasn't franchised out. It didn't have a bunch of sequels. It's notorious for being a really good movie with really good kills, and it has the beginnings of some notable movie star careers, including Holly Hunter and Jason Alexander, Fisher Stevens. We talked about that a bit in the video too. And it was worth noting that the movie is a take on the Cropsey legend, which we've talked about that in our horror documentary video. So there's a lot to like about this movie, but it still doesn't have the same mainstream knowledge or cachet or appeal as some of these bigger ones, but it's definitely one that was worth talking about because it just had a lot of fans and a lot of noteworthy things about it that made it eligible and important to talk about in the syllabus. The next slasher movie that we examined was Sleepaway Camp. And Sleepaway Camp is one of my personal favorites. I love that movie. And I had to admit, though, it's not because the movie is terribly good. It's not a very high quality film. It's low budget. The acting is quite poor for the most part. The kills, though, are very, very good. And the reason why this movie stands out is largely because of the notorious ending, which I didn't spoil then, and I'm not going to spoil now. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out for yourself, because it's the reason why this movie is famous. It's the reason why years and years, 40 years later, we're still talking about it, because it just manages to hit that hard. We talked a little bit about this franchising of this movie, the series, and the sequels, but we didn't spend a lot of time on those. Admittedly, they are hit and miss, but it's really the original movie and the ending of that original movie that makes it such a cult classic and such a fave for many people, including myself. Definitely one that you have to see for your horror education. And the last movie that we examined for the slasher subgenre was Maniac. And Maniac was an interesting choice because it was a little bit different than the camp in the woods, killing teens motif for the slasher subgenre. This was one that really got into the killer's head. It had the POV like many of these other movies like Friday the 13th did, but it really was about being in the head of the killer and the psychology of that killer. And it's a really grimy and gross movie. It just kind of makes you feel dirty. We spent a lot of time talking about how it just kind of had this off-putting, kind of dirty, grimy feel to it, in no small part because of the lead Joe Spinell who plays the killer. No spoilers there. And it really is his performance that lends it that gritty, realistic, uncomfortable feeling. That and the Tom Savini makeup. Tom Savini, who has a small part in the movie too, also did the makeup, and he did some really great stuff in there, including a scene where he gets his head blown off with a shotgun that is very memorable, very noteworthy, pretty famous, and is really one of the standout reasons why we talked about the movie. We went over this in the previous video, and it's definitely one that may not be for everybody because, again, it's a little bit of an uncomfortable feel, but it is a classic slasher movie. We talked about the remake also and how that's really good too. It's worth a watch, but my heart still probably lies with the original, but they're both excellent, and that's why we had to talk about them on the syllabus. So those were our selections for the slasher subgenre video, but now I've got our new doctorate level selection for you to check out. Our doctorate level selection for the slasher subgenre is In a Violent Nature. In a Violent Nature came out in 2024, it just came out very recently, and is a brand new slasher movie, or a new take on the slasher movie, directed by Chris Nash, and I believe it's his first feature film. He did do one of the shorts in ABCs of Death, I think it was Z, in case that means anything to anybody, and it is an interesting debut to say the least, and I'm very excited to see what he can do next, because this was one that I had high hopes for, and spoiler alert, it met my high hopes. If you haven't seen it yet, the movie is about a supernatural killer in the woods who gets raised inadvertently by some partying teens or early 20-somethings who take his mother's locket from his grave, and he rises from the dead to exact revenge and retrieve this locket and stalks them through the woods, and we stick with him rather than with the victims and see everything from his perspective, so to speak. And we'll stop there so as to not spoil it, but the hijinks absolutely abound in this movie, and they are hijinks indeed. And this is the thing about this movie. It's a slasher film. And we all know that slasher films are kind of formulaic, kind of tend to be the same. They're not tremendously original by and large, with some exceptions around the edges and stuff, but it's a formula. And I love that formula, and I'm happy to have that formula spoon-fed to me over and over again. Frankly, I don't seem to get too sick of it. But this movie is trying to give you something that is slightly fresh, and yet staying completely within those slasher tropes. Basically, what they're trying to do is give us an artsy, art house type slasher film. Basically giving us something that feels a little more like A24. It's just not A24 who did this movie, but it really is trying to do something that feels like it's more elevated, but it's not. It's just a slasher movie. It's just an interesting perspective on it, and that's really the key to what makes this movie interesting, is the perspective. Like I said, we're sitting behind the shoulder of the killer, this huge hulking zombie killer, supernatural killer that is stalking these people in the woods, and we're literally right over his shoulder. We're watching him walk through the woods. We're watching him spy on them. We're watching him make his plans. We're watching him kill them right over his shoulder. And the best way I can explain this, if you haven't seen it, is that it is kind of like the Friday the 13th video game that came out a few years ago. If you've ever played that, and if you played as Jason in that video, the perspective of kind of being like over his shoulder watching him as he walks around is the perspective of this movie for a large chunk of the movie. Not the whole movie, more on that in a little bit. But it's that perspective of being over his shoulder watching what he does that made it feel fresh and original and different, and that's what I was so excited about. They enhanced this whole experience by doing things that kind of, again, buck the slasher trend on the surface. Like, there's no music, so music cues, everything like that. It's just ambient sound, and do these long shots. There's a lot of shots of him just walking through the woods, and honestly, a lot of people probably found that to be a little bit dull because it's just a lot of him walking, but that's what he would be doing in the times where we're hanging out normally with the potential victims in a movie. Instead, we're sticking with him walking through the woods, looking for things, plotting things, wandering aimlessly, meandering. And so that's interesting, and I thought that was fantastic, but I know not everybody agreed. Again, we'll get into that in a little bit more. But they had come up with a new new monster, a new creature, a new killer that named Johnny, who has a whole backstory tied to this locket and tied to the area, and there's a whole folklore around him and everything like that the potential victims know or learn about through the locals. And it's all pretty good. Like I said, these slasher movies, they all kind of tend to be the same in this regard. So it's not anything revelatory or new. And he gets a mask, and the mask that he gets is pretty cool. And they show how he gets the mask. Everything about it is pretty cool. Like, he's a totally fine, if and actually maybe better than fine killer to be introduced. But he's not Jason. And that's really the thing that I probably wish the most about this movie is I wish that it had been Jason. I wish this was a Friday the 13th movie. I wish that Johnny was Jason, and I wish he had a hockey mask. It's the only thing that would have made this movie better for me, frankly, is to have a hockey mask on the guy, because I'm starved for a Friday the 13th movie. You know, it's like my favorite series, and this is as close as we've gotten to a Friday the 13th movie in, 15 plus years. So I really loved it, but I really wish it was a Friday the 13th movie. That was my knock on it, because the new killer is fine, but I love me some Jason. And I love the idea of sticking around with the Jason type character and walking with him, staying with him, seeing the familiar setups that we've seen from slasher movies like Friday the 13th, but from a different perspective. Like, there's a scene where he's watching people from the other side of the lake. We've seen people playing in the lake. We see that in all kinds of slasher movies that take place in the woods. Like, oh, everybody's going to play in the lake, but are they being watched? Well, yes, they are. And we're seeing it from the other side of the lake, and we're seeing him single-mindedly go after them, just walk straight into the water, and you know something bad's going to happen, but you're just kind of like removed from it in a way. It's just like a little bit of a step removed. It's just really cool. You still have the same creepy stalker motifs in this movie that you do in the standard slasher movie, but it's from a literal different perspective. It takes a different tone or style, because it's like you're the one doing the stalking, or you're really like behind the guy who's doing the stalking. You're not looking through his eyes, you're looking over his shoulder. And it's interesting because you see this this killer going after people, and sometimes he shows a certain amount of restraint in how he kills people. It's just like a quick kill, or it's kind of off camera, you can't quite see it. And then other times it's super duper gory, and that's great. If you're a gore hound like I tend to be, the kills in this movie are really great. There's this one in particular of I think she's doing yoga, a girl's doing yoga, who gets killed on a cliff. That is unbelievable. It is so gory and gross and imaginative. And I know a lot, if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. A lot of people are talking about that one. And there's a couple other really gory kills too, but then there's some other ones that are a little bit more not mundane, but just not quite so graphic, not quite so gory. And I kind of liked the changing it up a little bit, so that not every single kill was super imaginative, bloody, gory. Some of them were just kind of quick and efficient, and made sense for the situation. So I liked that aspect of it. Now, like I said, everybody loved this movie. I loved it. Obviously, I'm very emphatic about it, and I couldn't wait to talk about it as soon as it became available. Talking about it here on the syllabus, because I was excited to add this to the doctorate level, because this movie really won me over. But it didn't win over everybody. There was a lot of people who didn't feel it, and I think some of the people might not have been too into the gore. I think a lot of people might have found it dull when the killer's just walking through the woods. That was seemingly a common retort for people who didn't really buy into this movie so much. Some people complained that you didn't really get to know the victims very much. Like, you didn't really know much of anything about them. You didn't really have their backstory. You didn't really care about them. I liked that part, because we're seeing it from the killer's perspective. He doesn't care about them either. He doesn't know anything about them either. They're just in the way. They're just an obstacle in between him and his goal. And I love that. They really did just make the characters very bare bones. But I know that a lot of people might have had trouble connecting with that. In fact, the friend that I went to go see it with, who liked it but didn't like it nearly as much as I did, had that issue that the people who were being killed, they didn't know anything about them, you didn't care anything about them. And that's fine, because again, it's from the killer's perspective. Though at some point that shifts. At some point there is a perspective change towards the end. And that, I didn't love that part of it. That's something that I wish didn't happen, but I also not quite sure how they would have achieved the ending without doing that. That would have been maybe a little less exciting for the ending, a little less tension in the ending, if they hadn't done this perspective change. But I can forgive that, because I'm having such a good time with the movie. I'm having such a really great experience watching this movie. And again, it is a simple story supernatural killer rises from the grave, wants his locket back. It's, not really fleshed out characters. It's a slasher film. The thing I think that maybe some people were disappointed by was they're expecting it to be something more than this, given the buzz around it, given the concept being a little bit more highbrow, a little bit more artsy. It does look a little bit more artsy. It does have a different feel to it than the slasher movies. But at the end of the day, the content of the movie is a slasher film. And I love that. I think that's great. That's the kind of thing that I like. I like a great slasher movie. I think this is a great slasher movie. I think that it does just enough to give us a different feel, a different perspective, to make it feel fresh, even though it's really doing the same thing. It could be Friday the 13th, part 13. It could easily have been that. I wish it was that. It would have done exactly the same things that everybody who wants a Friday the 13th movie to do does, but it would have been feeling a little bit fresh because of this over-the-shoulder perspective change. I can't state enough how much that really just excited me and made me super into this movie, super excited to see. I saw this movie opening night, which I almost never do these days. So as you can see, I'm super hyped for it. Obviously, I'm really very much squarely the target audience for this movie. Again, not everybody else was. So if you're one of those people who didn't dig it, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are. Like I said, I know some of the complaints, and I'm not saying they're wrong complaints. Yeah, it could be a little dull to people seeing him walk around in the woods. It could be a little frustrating if you don't really know that much about the people who are in danger. You might not care about them as much. Maybe the gore's a little too much for you. Maybe that feeling of looking over the shoulder is a little more uncomfortable. All of that stuff, valid. All of it. It just didn't bother me. I was just super into it anyway. So maybe I'm just too easy of a sell because I love slasher so much. We can have a conversation about that in the comments below, of course. But if you like slasher movies and you haven't seen this yet, for me, it's a high recommend. Caveats being the things that I've just mentioned, but I think this movie is a blast. I think it's a lot of fun. I don't know that I'd want a sequel to it. I don't know that I'd want to see them mine this for more because I feel like too much of it would get old really fast. So unless they had another idea for it that was really, really interesting, I'd kind of be wary of seeing another sequel. I kind of hope this is a standalone film. I wish it was a Friday the 13th sequel, but I love it. And hopefully if you check it out, you'll love it too. So that's our choice for the extra credit selection for the slasher subgenre. But of course, I've got an extra credit selection for you. And yeah, this was a little hard because there are so many movies that I still want to talk about that are slashers. I've tried to find places to put them on the syllabus because I enjoy them so much. So narrowing it down to just one extra credit was a little bit of a challenge, but I did do it. And in fact, the whole thing about this video is I put this video off a little bit because I couldn't decide what to do. And then In Violent Nature came out, and I knew immediately when I saw it that I wanted to use that for my Doctorate Level selection. And then it was just a matter of, well, now I'm down to one extra credit movie. So what did I pick? The extra credit selection I picked was The Prowler. The Prowler came out in 1981, and it's directed by Joseph Zito, who is the director of Friday the 13th Part 4, amongst many other movies. But Friday the 13th Part 4, one of my favorites of the Friday the 13th series. And again, I love me some Friday the 13th, as you know. So this is an interesting one for me to pick because it's Joseph Zito and it's Tom Savini doing the gore effects. So I'm already halfway there. But the thing is, this movie's got a lot more going for it than just that. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a World War II veteran who had been dumped by his girlfriend and went on a killing spree back in the 1940s. And now in the early 1980s, he is back apparently to terrorize this small town's dance that hasn't had a dance since the last time he did this killing rampage. And he is dressed in his full military gear out to kill all these college graduates who are in love and having a good time and are going to face his wrath. And of course, hijinks abound, and we'll stop there so as not to spoil it for everybody. But this movie probably sounds a little bit familiar from my high-level summary to you. If you've seen My Bloody Valentine, this all might ring a little bit true. A town dance for a town that doesn't had a dance in quite a while because of a previous tragedy in the town years ago. And now there's a killer who's wearing a particular costume that kind of looks like this other costume. Like, there's a lot of similarities between the two. And I think that those similarities have hurt The Prowler in its reputation over the years. And that's a shame because it's a really, really good movie. I understand why the similarities hurts it because, and I'll be straight up, My Bloody Valentine is probably the better of the two movies, frankly. But this doesn't mean that this movie should be overlooked because it's really quite good. Right off the bat, when you're getting the newsreels about World War II, you can tell you have a different feel than you normally have for a slasher movie. the whole opening scene is set at a dance in the 1940s, like 1945, and all these, guys from the war, all these soldiers coming home to be back with their girls, and one of them's gotten dumped. And the production value of this is actually quite good. And I'll be honest with you, I kind of wish the whole movie was set in 1945. I imagine they probably didn't have the budget to do that, but it looks really good, and it's an interesting take to have this slasher idea in the 1940s. That's fun. I like that idea. But alas, they jump into the 80s, and that's fine. Like the 80s setup is great. You've got a sorority, and you've got a dance, and you've got this killer stalking everybody. Standard slasher film, standard slasher gore, standard slasher tropes, but it's really living up to expectations in large part because of the Savini gore. The Tom Savini kills are really, really great. In fact, so great that they were too upsetting for many countries, which wound up having edited versions. Of course, the UK had the edited version. Other countries cut it out completely. I think Germany cut out the kills completely, named it something else, and it's pretty easy to see why. I think the kills are pretty gruesome. There's not a lot of them, but the ones that are in there are very, very good. It's Tom Savini doing some of his really best work. It's just really great. The pitchfork kill in the shower, in particular, is a very noteworthy, gruesome kill. It goes on a long time. Looks really, really good, really, really gory, and just top-notch work, frankly. But the pitchfork's interesting because the whole motif is this guy's a World War II veteran. He's got his World War II gear, and he's killing people with his bayonet and stuff like that. But he's also got this pitchfork, and I don't think they ever explained the pitchfork. I don't know why he's got a pitchfork. I have no idea. It's just kind of random. And there, if there's a knock on the movie, that's what it is. Is that the story's a little bit messy. It's a little flimsy. Like we get the premise because again, it's the premise. This is the same premise as My Bloody Valentine. That part's fine, but the whole backstory for the killer is a little bit wonky, a little bit shady. You've got this this whole thing with this prowler who's out on the loose in a nearby town, and the sheriff deputy who's got to be on the lookout while the sheriff's out of town and stuff like that. It's all fine. That's all fine stuff. But when you get to the reveal, and to be honest with you, the reveal of the killer is pretty obvious. You should be able to guess fairly. If you're used to these slasher movies, you know who that killer is pretty early on. But the motivation behind it, the rationale, is a little bit hazy. It's not really spelled out super well. But you're having a good time, so you don't mind. Like, if you like a slasher movie, this is a good one. You've got a very likable final girl who tends to do smart things. You're rooting for her. You've got her boyfriend is the sheriff's deputy, and you're really into them. You're rooting for them to win. The good gore, it's good suspense scenes. There's a lot of things to like about this movie, so you're not really upset about the shortcomings of it. Yeah, it's got a flimsy story. Yeah, the backstory might not make super sense. Yeah, the killer's weapon of choice maybe not really logical, but that's true of most slasher movies. There's so many slasher movies that's true about. So, and you can nitpick if you want, but then you're nitpicking all the slasher movies. I really like this movie. I'm glad I was able to find a place to put it on because I tried to put this on the syllabus proper and never could really quite squeeze it in. So I'm squeezing it in here. And again, I feel like it's an underrated movie largely because My Bloody Valentine really does kind of overshadow it. But it's got the cult love. It's got the modern critical love. It was not really critically loved when it first came out. It was not a hit. It was not a commercial or critical hit. But since then, people have reevaluated it and said, yeah, it's a really good movie. It tends to make a lot of lists. If you look at like underrated slashers, this movie tends to be on it. And it's clear to see why. When you check it out, it's really quite a ride. If you like slasher movies and you haven't seen The Prowler, you should definitely check this one out. It's a fun one. It's a good ride. Again, it's not doing more than it needs to do. It's a standard slasher movie. It's not going to really break the mold, but that's good. That's a fun thing. And so this is, to me, an underrated gem that you should check out. And then, of course, come back and let me know what you think. So that's going to do it for our revisiting the slasher subgenre and looking at a new movie and an old movie and really just kind of getting back into this because I love this stuff. I could talk about slasher movies for days, frankly. I just love it. And yeah, I know it's not the deepest of subgenres. I know that these movies aren't super deep. They tend to be repetitive. I don't care. I love them, and I know many of you love them too. So hopefully y'all have had a good time going back and looking at the stuff we talked about previously and this new stuff. And again, In a Violent Nature, awesome. I love it. I absolutely love it. But I also love looking at horror Trivial Pursuit cards with you guys. So it's time for us to do that. Let's go ahead and look at the card. And of course, we're going to go with the killer category because, slashers, of course. So here's the question. What film in the Halloween series from 1978 to 1989 was the first to not involve John Carpenter. And it's interesting that year range is incorrect, obviously, because the Halloween series is still going on, frankly. But I digress, because I don't think that's a clue to anything. I don't think that, they're trying to say that, oh, John Carpenter was involved in everything. And we all know John Carpenter did the first movie. We all know that he did the second movie. And we all know that he famously kind of left the series. He left it because he didn't really want it to go the way that it was going. He didn't want to keep revisiting Michael Myers over and over again. And so that maybe is, a little bit of a clue here. So I'll be honest with you. Like, I'm pretty sure I know this, but I'm not 100% sure that I know this. I have my idea, and my wheels are kind of spinning, and look, Friday the 13th is my favorite, but Halloween is a very, very, very close second. In fact, I would argue that while Friday the 13th might be my favorite slasher series, Halloween is probably the better of the two, objectively speaking. It probably has higher highs, maybe has some lower lows too. I think Friday the 13th tends to be pretty static in terms of quality, but the Halloween series has some really great. Nothing in the Friday the 13th series matches the original Halloween. It's a masterpiece. But I digress. We're looking at John Carpenter, the creator of Halloween, the original director, and prattled on a little bit, give you guys a little bit of time to think about this. Which movie is the first movie that he's not involved in, right? So lock in your answers, because I'm about to spin my rationale here. So, like I said, he directed the first movie, directed the second movie, and I'm pretty sure he was involved in the third movie. I'm pretty sure that he produced it, and maybe he helped write it. I don't really remember that part of it. I'm almost positive that he helped produce that. However, the fourth movie is when they decided to bring back Michael Myers, because that's what the fans wanted, and John Carpenter did not want that. So I think he had nothing to do with the fourth movie, but I'm not positive. He might have stayed on as a producer and name in the fourth movie. I don't really remember for sure. So I'm going to go with fourth movie, though. I'm going to go with fourth movie. I think that because I know at some point he sells his interest to the Akkads, the producers, and just walks away from it. And my guess would be at the fourth movie, he didn't want to bring Michael Myers back, just sells his interest in it, walks away. So that's my guess. Fourth movie. Was it Return of Michael Myers? So let's look. Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, 1988. So yes, and maybe that's where the time frame that they gave for the movies made some sense, because that was the movie that he wanted out on. That makes sense. I was able to use deductive reasoning to get that one out, but I kind of thought I knew what it was anyways. So I'm guessing a lot of you actually knew it right away. A lot of you are probably slasher film fans, probably big Halloween fans, probably know all that stuff. So probably was preaching to the choir. But if you got it right, let me know. And if you didn't get it right, let me know what you guessed. Which movie did you guess? Did you guess like H2O or something? Halloween Resurrection. Anyways, let me know what you said in the comments below. Let me know if you can think of other cool slashers in the comments below. If it's something I haven't seen, maybe I'll check it out and talk about it in a future video. But until then, let's just say, class dismissed.